My relationship to Nuremberg, as a Jew, it's something
So
that
your
was,
parents were children. Our parents were children at the time.
yeah.
Right. They were barely old enough to be conscious of it, but it was something that was discussed in your family, no doubt.
My dad was old enough to get it as a child, to understand what
Yeah,
was
he would
going
have been a
on.
teenager.
Yeah. But, I certainly heard this from my grandparents, and, my grandfather lived long enough that, I had a close relationship with him into adulthood. And so Nuremberg it wasn't a regular topic of conversation, but it was certainly discussed, and its meaning was made apparent. As I think I've said before, I knew from the discussions in the household that I grew up in that the elders all believed that it could happen again, and that it could even happen, quote unquote, here. I know that I accepted that formally, but probably didn't think I was likely to see it. In fact, I'm sure I didn't think I was likely to see it until COVID proved that actually these very circuits are alive and well.
Yeah. I didn't grow up in a Jewish household, but many of my friends and family friends were, where it was more of a topic of conversation. But I remember thinking as a child that the phrase "never again" was necessary and important, but also probably kind of irrelevant here in the United States because I guess it didn't. My naive understanding was that we are relatively safe here, having to do with the oceans that separate us from most of where the world wars happen, and to do with our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. Honestly,
I don't think that was naive. I think something that requires analysis inverted the conclusion, but I think that was a reasonable conclusion based on the following analysis. The thing that America most importantly did that was unique was it laid out a framework for people to collaborate irrespective of their degree of relatedness. I won't go too deep here, but there are really two evolutionary justifications for collaboration. One of them is shared genes. The reason that a parent will run into a burning building to save their child is well understood evolutionarily. But there's a second reason, and that's reciprocity, specifically spelled out by Bob Trivers in a famous paper. Bob Trivers was our good friend, and
undergraduate
mentor, right? Great guy. One of the most important evolutionary biologists of the 20th century. Anyway, he spelled out the principle of reciprocal altruism, reciprocity. And the American experiment, just by its nature, was an experiment in stabilizing reciprocity as the principal reason for people to move forward as a nation. I don't think the founders really even understood that that's what was so radical about what they were doing. They were doing many radical things. I think they would have recognized that. But obviously Darwin hadn't written yet. So, we did not have the tools for the founders to really understand that they were playing around with an evolutionary fundamental. Now, the evolutionary fundamental turns out to be lightning in a bottle. If you put aside degrees of relatedness and you collaborate based on reciprocity, that is to say, if I ignore your race and collaborate with you, we both come out ahead, so why wouldn't I? If you do that, then you can create much faster than a society that is either limited to one population or has an uneasy peace between populations.
You will create wealth faster, wealth coming in the form not just of money, and in fact, least often of money perhaps, but in terms of innovation and advances that allow everyone in that society to live more productive lives.
And if you think about the number of inventions that changed the world that were American in origin, it is a shocking list. There is no reason that a population that was a small fraction of the globe should be responsible for the light bulb, the telephone, the computer, the
Airplane.
automobile, the train. I guess the automobile is half and half. But anyway, there's a...
Where else is the automobile
I
from?
think it's Daimler and Ford
Okay.
somehow.
Well, but airplane.
Airplane, absolutely. Right. The list is just like all the huge things, right? Why is that? And in my opinion, it's because the experiment, which never got where it was going, it's not like racism disappeared, but racism did become a minor fact, and collaborating across racial divisions was the dominant theme, and wow, did that work. So anyway, I think you as a child were not being naive. You were registering who in their right mind would upend this for anything else.
Yeah, that's it, I guess. So we're talking, we were children in the 70s and 80s, and we have heard from friends recently, independent people who don't know each other, who have chosen different but adjacent decades and said, man, people now don't understand how good we had it in the 90s. And others who are slightly older are saying people today do not understand how good we had it in the 80s, and how good we had it could sound crass and simply about acquiring stuff and getting more things, and that's not it at all. Like it really was an era of increasing openness and inquiry and creativity and therefore productivity. And, everyone was ever more welcome at any table that they wanted to come to if they offered something. People were increasingly not denied access on the basis of immutable characteristics, that mostly, right? We weren't there. You'll never get to perfect fairness. You'll never get to perfect equality, in part because there are differences in opportunity that happen even before you're born, right? And differences in familial wealth, for instance. And, in this country, differences in outcomes based on the randomness of the zip code into which you were born, which some will argue isn't random, but it is certainly predictive of outcomes. And so, the fact that zip codes are often segregated by skin color means that is a persistent indicator of places where the American experiment had not gotten where it needed to go yet, but we were moving in the right direction.
Well, that's the thing I wanted to say is I don't want to get nostalgic over any decade, but
I was just, it's
right.
interesting that I've
It's
heard
like
that from a number of
that.
people lately.
Well,
independently saying, God, people don't know how good we had it in the 90s. That's the one I resonate with more because that's when we were in grad school, and that's when I was sort of out in the world going like, oh man, yeah. Like there was like, I had a web page, but most people weren't spending, almost no one was spending all their time in the screens, right?
Well, I think the only reason I refrain from that is that I think it's like an instantaneous measure where what people are really reacting to is that we were on the right track.
Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't mean there wasn't a whole lot of carnage, and it doesn't mean that there wasn't a long way to go. But being on the right trajectory is, it's what you want. You're making progress in a direction that is productive. And we are clearly on the wrong trajectory now. Somewhere we got disrupted.
So many wrong tracks now.
And the point, though, is if reciprocal altruism is the goose that laid the golden eggs, right? That's the thing that made America a country that does not represent a huge fraction of the world's population. It's a large fraction, but it's tiny compared to India, China, lots of places. If the thing that made that population so disproportionately successful in creating wealth in the form of inventions is one way you can measure it, then what happens when you go from being less and less concerned about race and population to being more and more concerned is that the collaboration that was so productive breaks down into something that isn't productive at all, right?
Trust dies first.
Trust dies, and what you revert to is the teams where you're looking for indicators of who's related
Back
to
to your
whom.
corners. Why are you looking at me like that?
Right. And that is an insane thing to have flirted with or to be flirting with, which is what we're doing. I guess in passing, I would also say, I know that you and I were both struck by the death of Tina Turner this week.
Yeah.
And I think there's, I was listening to Little Tina Turner on the way over, and there's something very powerful and emblematic of where we were, right? Tina Turner was a black woman,
Born in 1939.
1939, who everybody loved Tina Turner, right?
Yeah.
This was,
Except Ike Turner.
well, but also that,
Yes,
right? The
absolutely.
fact that Ike and Tina were a phenomenon. Ike was a bad guy, and Tina Turner eclipsed Ike Turner.
Escaped from his abuse and became what she should have become and eclipsed him.
Right, and did so with
As she should have.
tremendous poise. There is this is a full-fledged woman who is not playing games with pretending that she is a girl, right?
Yep.
Full-fledged woman, and the point is everybody got it, right? So that was like an indication of what is possible in this space. No pretense about race, no pretense about sex and gender, just the
Yep.
real article, right?
And just so much talent
So much
and
talent.
soul.
Yep.
Yeah.